The Pacific stretched beneath a steel-gray sky, waves churning against the horizon like liquid metal. It was the kind of storm front that made even seasoned naval pilots check their equipment twice. In the distance, lightning split the clouds, illuminating the silhouette of an aircraft carrier struggling against the mounting swells. Inside the cramped cabin of a naval helicopter, Commander Maya Reed adjusted her course with the steady hands of someone who had flown through far worse than a simple squall. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The naval base at Pearl Harbor had fallen silent as the typhoon warning systems blared across the compound. Inside the command center, radar operators tracked the approaching helicopter with mounting concern. Unidentified aircraft has entered restricted airspace bearing 045 at 2,000 feet, announced the radar technician, voice-clipped and professional. No flight plan filed. No response to radio contact attempts. Captain Elijah Daniels strode across the command center, his posture rigid with tension. At 42, Daniels had built his career on strict adherence to protocol. His neatly trimmed beard and immaculate uniform projected the image of a man who expected nothing less than perfection from those under his command. Another civilian pilot who doesn't understand the meaning of restricted airspace, he muttered, leaning over the radar screen. How close are they to the base perimeter? 10 miles and closing, sir. Speed 110 knots. Heading directly toward the northern approach corridor. Daniel's jaw tightened. Unacceptable. Scramble intercept helicopters immediately. The approaching typhoon is already complicating our operations. This is not the day for unauthorized flights. The order rippled through the chain of command. Within minutes, 2 SH-60 Seahawk helicopters lifted from the tarmac, rotors beating against the strengthening winds. Lieutenant Sophia Keller felt the familiar vibration through her flight controls as her helicopter rose into the turbulent sky. At 31, Sophia was one of the most skilled helicopter pilots stationed at Pearl Harbor, her natural talent having earned her rapid advancement despite institutional barriers. She had joined the Navy with dreams of following in the footsteps of the legendary pilots whose classified missions were spoken of in hushed tones during training. Seahawk 1, this is command, came Daniel's voice through her headset. Intercept and identify approaching aircraft. Standard protocol. Force compliance or escort to landing pad. Copy that command, Sophia responded, adjusting her course. ETA 5 minutes to intercept. Seahawk 2, maintain wide approach pattern, she instructed her wingman. Her second helicopter acknowledged, banking slightly to establish the standard intercept formation. Sophia kept her focus on her instruments, compensating for the increasingly violent air currents as they approached the storm front. The helicopter bucked against her controls, demanding her complete attention to maintain steady flight. Back in the command center, Captain Daniels paced behind the radar operators, his expression growing more concerned as he studied the weather patterns moving across the digital display. Have we identified the aircraft yet? He demanded. Appears to be a Navy SH-60, sir, but the identification codes aren't matching anything in our active roster, replied the communications officer. No response to any standard authentication protocols. Daniels frowned. Pirates? Drug runners using stolen equipment? Aircraft is maintaining direct course, sir. No evasive maneuvers, the radar operator noted. Almost like what, Ensign? Daniels prompted. Like they want to be intercepted, sir. In her helicopter, Maya noticed the approaching military aircraft on her radar display. She checked her watch with a grim smile. Right on schedule. Her expression remained neutral as she maintained her course, adjusting only for the increasingly volatile wind patterns. She had navigated through conditions that would ground most military pilots, and a simple intercept would not deter her. Sophia spotted the approaching helicopter first, its outline barely visible through sheets of driving rain. Visual contact established, she reported. Sophia guided her helicopter alongside the unidentified aircraft, close enough to make visual contact with the pilot. Her breath caught as she recognized the face behind the controls. A woman in her early 40s, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun, revealing sharp cheekbones and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of countless missions. Unidentified aircraft in restricted airspace. This is United States Navy Interceptor, Sophia broadcast. You have entered a no-fly zone. Acknowledge immediately and follow my lead to approved landing zone. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maya made eye contact with Sophia and nodded once, acknowledging the message. But instead of altering course to follow, she maintained her original heading, checking her instruments with methodical precision. Command, pilot has acknowledged visual contact but is not complying with directional instructions, Sophia reported, feeling the first stirrings of unease. This was not the standard response from unauthorized aircraft. Repeat warnings and indicate consequences of non-compliance, Daniels ordered, his voice hardening. Display aggressive posture if necessary. Something was building in the air above Pearl Harbor, tension that transcended the approaching storm. In her cockpit, Maya Reed continued her steady course toward the naval base, carrying secrets that had been buried for 3 years. The interceptors flanking her were about to discover that some secrets refused to remain hidden. Sophia maneuvered her helicopter into a more assertive position, ensuring the unidentified pilot could see that interception was not optional. She repeated the warning, adding, "Failure to comply will result in forced escort. This is your final warning." Again, Maya nodded but did not alter course. Her hands remained steady on the controls as the helicopter fought against the strengthening storm winds. Command, unidentified aircraft still non-responsive to directional commands, Sophia reported, confusion evident in her professional tone. Captain Daniels' patience had reached its limit. The unauthorized aircraft had been in restricted airspace for nearly 15 minutes, ignoring every protocol designed to maintain security, all while a Category 4 typhoon approached the Hawaiian Islands. "Lieutenant, you are authorized to execute Procedure Bravo," Daniels commanded. "Bring that aircraft into compliance immediately." Procedure Bravo, forcing compliance through aggressive positioning. Sophia had trained for this, but had never implemented it during an actual intercept. She signaled her wingman, and both Seahawks moved into flanking positions that would force the unidentified helicopter to land at the nearest viable location. But Maya Reed was far from intimidated by conventional tactics. Her experiences had carried her far beyond standard military procedures. Lieutenant Raj Patel had been monitoring communications since the alert began. Unlike other operators, Patel had specialized training in signal analysis from his time with naval intelligence. Something about the unidentified helicopter's communication system nagged at him. A subtle irregularity in the transmission pattern that most technicians would dismiss as storm interference. "Sir," he called to Captain Daniels, "I'm detecting an unusual pattern in the communication signatures from the unidentified aircraft." Daniels barely glanced at Patel's station, his attention focused on the intercept operation. "Irrelevant. Focus on the immediate security breach." "But sir, it's cycling through frequencies in a non-standard pattern," Patel insisted, studying his screen more carefully, running the signal through various recognition algorithms. "Almost like a code." "Like what, Lieutenant?" Daniels snapped, his frustration mounting. "Like an old naval intelligence recognition code, sir. Special operations variant." For the first time, Daniels paused, looking more closely at Patel's screen. The display showed a complex pattern of frequency shifts that seemed deliberately structured. "That's impossible," he said. "Those codes were replaced years ago." "Yes, sir, but I'm running it through the historical database now." Daniels dismissed the concern with a wave. "Probably signal degradation from the storm." "Lieutenant Keller, what is your status?" he asked, returning his attention to the intercept. In the air, Sophia had positioned her Seahawk directly in the unidentified helicopter's flight path. A clear signal that proceeding further would be impossible. To her surprise, the unknown aircraft finally began to bank, not away from the restricted zone, but in a precise pattern that seemed oddly familiar. "Command, unidentified aircraft is executing some kind of recognition pattern," Sophia reported, watching with growing amazement. "Not complying with escort, but demonstrating exceptional flight skills in deteriorating conditions." As Sophia watched, the helicopter performed a series of maneuvers that no casual pilot should have been capable of, especially not in the midst of an approaching typhoon. Minute adjustments in pitch, yaw, and roll that together formed a distinct sequence. The precision was extraordinary, like watching a virtuoso perform with an instrument that should have been impossible to master in such conditions. In the command center, Patel's computer suddenly pinged. The recognition software had found a match, and the results made his blood run cold. "Sir, I've got an identification from the pattern analysis," Patel announced, his voice tight with disbelief. "It's coming up as a classified designation, Blue Heron." The command center fell silent. Radar operators stopped their chatter. Communications personnel paused mid-sentence. Even the electronic hum of equipment seemed to quiet, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Captain Daniels stared at the screen in complete disbelief. The designation that had appeared was one he'd heard mentioned only in classified briefings, never in active operations. Blue Heron was a ghost story, a legend from the special operations files that most officers assumed was classified fiction. "That's impossible," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Run it again." Patel's fingers flew across his keyboard, double-checking every parameter. "System confirmed, sir. Designation Blue Heron. Authentication protocols matching historical patterns." Before Daniels could respond, the door to the command center swung open with unusual force. Admiral Victoria Hayes entered, moving with surprising speed for a woman of 65. Though officially in an administrative role, Hayes had decades of combat experience that had earned her the respect of everyone at Pearl Harbor. "What did you just say?" Hayes demanded, her weathered face suddenly alert with an intensity that made junior officers step back instinctively. Patel swallowed nervously. "Ma'am, the system identified the aircraft's communication pattern as Blue Heron." All color drained from Hayes' face. She moved to Patel's station with focused urgency. "Where did you get that designation? That call sign has been inactive for 3 years. Captain Daniels intervened, irritated by what he saw as an unnecessary interruption. "Admiral, with all due respect, we have an intercept in progress. This unidentified aircraft has violated restricted airspace during a typhoon warning and refused to comply with military directives." Quote, "The communication pattern, Captain," Hayes insisted, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded operations that didn't officially exist. "Where is it coming from?" "The unidentified Seahawk, ma'am," Patel replied. "It's broadcasting on frequencies that haven't been used since before the Mariana Islands incident." Hayes pushed past Daniels to the communication station, her movements sharp and decisive. Years of administrative duty seemed to fall away as she assumed the bearing of an active commander. "Patch me through to the intercept team now." Daniels stepped forward, his face flushed with frustration. "Admiral, this is my operation. That aircraft is unauthorized in restricted airspace and has failed to comply with lawful orders." Hayes turned to face him, and Daniels was struck by the intensity in the older woman's eyes. "You don't understand what you're dealing with, Captain. If that truly is Blue Heron, you need to stand down immediately." "Stand down? That's absurd." Daniels moved to his communication station. "Lieutenant Keller, proceed with procedure Bravo. You are authorized to force landing." But Hayes was faster, grabbing the microphone with the reflexes of someone who had spent decades in crisis situations. "Lieutenant, this is Admiral Hayes. Verify identification protocol, Echo Whiskey 5. High above Pearl Harbor, Sophia heard the conflicting orders with growing confusion. Protocol demanded she follow her commanding officer's directions, but Admiral Hayes' voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone operating under classified parameters. "Copy that, Admiral. Implementing Echo Whiskey 5 verification," she acknowledged, switching frequencies to broadcast the verification request to the unidentified helicopter. What happened next would change everything they thought they knew about the quiet woman in the aircraft below. In response to Sophia's verification signal, Maya executed a precise series of maneuvers that defied every assumption about helicopter aviation. The Seahawk performed movements that should have been impossible for the aircraft, especially in the midst of a strengthening typhoon. A complex pattern that spoke of skills developed far beyond any standard training program. Sophia's breath caught as she recognized the sequence. "Command, the unidentified aircraft is performing the Marianas Weave. I've only seen that in classified training footage." The Marianas Weave, a complex flight pattern developed for special operations pilots operating in hostile weather conditions under enemy fire. It had never been taught outside the most elite circles of naval aviation, and certainly never to civilian pilots. In the command center, Captain Daniels watched the radar track with growing frustration and confusion. His orderly world of protocols and procedures was colliding with something that existed outside normal military channels. "This changes nothing," he insisted. "The aircraft remains in violation of restricted airspace during a typhoon warning. Lieutenant, you will proceed with forced escort." But Admiral Hayes was already reaching for the emergency communication line, her fingers punching in a code that bypassed normal security protocols. "This is Hayes. Authorization Sierra Tango 341 Priority Alpha. She's back. Blue Heron is in the air." The line connected immediately, indicating the call had triggered the highest-level emergency response systems. On the other end, someone with authority far above Pearl Harbor Naval Base was listening. "Delay that order," Hayes shouted, turning to prevent Daniels from issuing further commands to the intercept team. Daniels attempted to regain control of the situation. "Lieutenant Keller, you will follow my orders. Prepare to engage." Suddenly, every screen in the command center flickered. Emergency override protocols activated as a new video feed appeared, transmitted through channels that existed above normal military command structures. Admiral James Harrington, Pacific Fleet Commander, looked out from the main screen, his stern expression making it clear this was not a routine call. "Admiral Hayes, is the identification confirmed?" he demanded without preamble, his voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected national security. "Positive, sir. It's her signature pattern. No one else could execute those maneuvers in these conditions." Captain Daniels stepped into view of the camera, his face tight with controlled anger. "Admiral Harrington, with all due respect, this is a clear security breach. The aircraft has violated restricted airspace during a typhoon warning and ignored multiple lawful orders to comply." Harrington's gaze shifted to him, and Daniels felt the full weight of his authority. "Captain Daniels, you will stand down immediately. This operation is now classified Priority Alpha." "With all due respect, Admiral," Daniels protested, his career-long dedication to protocol warring with the surreal situation unfolding around him. "This is an unidentified aircraft in restricted airspace during a weather emergency. Protocol clearly states." "Captain." Harrington cut him off with surgical precision. "This comes directly from the Secretary of the Navy. Stand down." He turned his attention to the communications officer. "Broadcast on all channels. Abort intercept mission. Escort Blue Heron to secure landing area. VIP Protocol Alpha." The command center erupted in controlled chaos. Younger personnel looked confused, while older officers exchanged glances of recognition and concern. Names like Blue Heron existed in the whispered legends of special operations, stories that were told in classified briefings but never confirmed. In her cockpit high above Pearl Harbor, Sophia heard the new orders with complete disbelief. "Escort Blue Heron to VIP Protocol Alpha." She looked across at the other helicopter, studying its pilot with new eyes. The auburn-haired woman met her gaze steadily, her expression revealing nothing of the secret she carried. Yet somehow, in that moment of eye contact across the turbulent sky, Sophia felt she was in the presence of something extraordinary. This wasn't just a pilot who had wandered into restricted airspace. This was someone whose very existence had triggered emergency protocols at the highest levels of naval command. "That's Blue Heron," she whispered to herself, a chill running down her spine despite the warmth of her flight suit. Below them, the Pacific Ocean churned with the approaching typhoon, keeping its secrets as it had for millennia. But today, one of those secrets was returning from 3 years of exile, carrying knowledge that could shake the foundations of naval intelligence. As the formation adjusted to escort rather than intercept, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Whatever had brought Blue Heron back from the shadows was significant enough to override every protocol in the book. The storm-darkened sky that had seemed so threatening hours earlier now felt charged with possibility and danger. Somewhere in that helicopter flew a woman whose story had been erased from official records, but whose legend lived on in the classified corners of naval aviation. And she was coming home, just as the greatest storm in decades bore down on Pearl Harbor. The command center at Pearl Harbor Naval Base had transformed from orderly military precision into controlled chaos. Officers rushed between stations while communications personnel struggled to establish secure lines on multiple channels. At the center of this storm stood Admiral Hayes, her weathered face grave as she watched the radar tracking the small helicopter, now flanked by two Seahawks in escort formation. "I need every non-essential person out of this room now," Admiral Harrington ordered from the video screen. "Security clearance level Indigo or higher only." Junior officers and support staff quickly evacuated, leaving only senior personnel and those directly involved in the operation. Captain Daniels remained, his face flushed with a mixture of confusion and indignation at having his authority superseded by forces he didn't understand. "Admiral, I demand an explanation," Daniels said, stepping forward with the rigid posture of someone whose entire worldview was under assault. "This unidentified aircraft has deliberately violated restricted airspace during a typhoon warning. Protocol dictates." "Protocol is suspended, Captain," Harrington interrupted sharply. "You're still here because you're the base security commander. But make no mistake, this operation now falls under Naval Special Warfare Command authority." Admiral Hayes moved to the communication station with the efficient movements of someone returning to familiar territory. "Lieutenant Keller, confirm escort formation. Guide the helicopter to landing pad Delta 3. Full security protocol. No ground personnel except authorized list." In the sky above Pearl Harbor, Sophia adjusted her Seahawks position, still processing the dramatic shift in mission parameters. The mysterious aircraft now held VIP status, escorted rather than intercepted. Through her canopy, she could see the auburn-haired woman piloting the other helicopter with extraordinary precision, maintaining perfect formation despite the increasingly violent storm conditions. "Roger that, Admiral." "Escort formation established. ETA to landing pad Delta 3 6 minutes," Sophia responded, training overriding her curiosity about the radical change in circumstances. The doors to the command center opened again as Commander Marcus Chen entered, carrying a sealed metal briefcase. At 48, Chen moved with the careful precision of someone accustomed to handling information that could destabilize governments. His presence immediately caught Hayes' attention. "You got here quickly," Hayes noted, studying the intelligence officer's expression. Chen nodded grimly. "I was already on base when the alert came through. The system is programmed to notify me if certain designations appear." He paused, meeting Hayes' eyes. "Is it confirmed?" "It's her," Hayes said simply. "She's performing maneuvers only she could execute, especially in these conditions." Daniels looked between the two officers, his frustration mounting as he realized how much was happening beyond his knowledge. Would someone please explain what's happening? Who exactly is piloting that helicopter? Admiral Harrington's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Captain Daniels, what I'm about to tell you is classified above top secret. 3 years ago, the Navy had a special operations pilot with skills that exceeded anything we'd seen before or since. Her call sign was Blue Heron." "I've never heard of any such program," Daniels replied, his voice betraying his growing unease. "You wouldn't have," Chen said, placing his briefcase on the central table. "The program was compartmentalized beyond normal classification levels. Even mentioning its existence was restricted to those with direct operational need to know." Harrington continued from the screen, his expression growing more serious. "Blue Heron disappeared 3 years ago after a mission went catastrophically wrong, at least according to official records. Her status has been classified ever since." Lieutenant Patel, still at his radar station, looked up from his instruments. "Sir, the helicopter is executing another pattern. It's impossible for that aircraft in these conditions." On the screen, they watched as the small helicopter performed a series of maneuvers that defied the physical limitations of the aircraft. Each adjustment was minute and precise, pushing the boundaries of what the helicopter should be capable of without highly advanced systems. "That's her confirmation signature," Hayes said quietly, her voice carrying a mixture of pride and concern. Only she could fly like that. Commander Chen placed his palm on a biometric scanner embedded in his briefcase. After a moment of electronic verification, the case unlocked with a soft pneumatic hiss. Inside was a single digital tablet and a small metallic device resembling a specialized key. "Admiral, requesting permission to access Blue Heron files," Chen said formally. "Permission granted. Security override Charlie 4 Whiskey." Chen inserted the key into the tablet, then entered a complex sequence of commands that seemed to require both cryptographic knowledge and physical manipulation of the device. The main screen in the command center switched from Admiral Harrington's feed to a classified file interface. The heading simply read, Operation Stormwatch, Blue Heron, Primary Asset. A photograph appeared of a younger Maya Reed in naval dress uniform, receiving a commendation from an admiral whose face was deliberately obscured in the image. Her personnel file listed achievements and skill assessments that seemed almost superhuman. Flight performance metrics that pushed the boundaries of what was physically possible. "This is impossible," Daniels muttered, scanning the performance data displayed on multiple screens. No pilot could achieve these scores. "She did," Hayes said, her voice carrying the weight of personal knowledge. "I was her commanding officer for 5 years before she was recruited for specialized operations." The screen changed to aerial footage of what appeared to be a rescue operation in the midst of a violent tropical storm. A small, unmarked helicopter executed impossible maneuvers through hurricane-force winds, landing briefly on what couldn't even be called a landing zone, then taking off again with remarkable speed despite being visibly overloaded with passengers. Operation Stormwatch, Chen narrated as the footage played. 3 years ago, a research vessel with 47 personnel was caught in a Category 5 typhoon in the South China Sea. Standard rescue operations were deemed impossible due to extreme weather conditions. Even unmanned aircraft couldn't maintain stability. Blue Heron volunteered for a solo extraction mission, Hayes added, her voice holding a note of pride despite her grim expression. "Solo rescue of 47 people in a Category 5 typhoon?" Daniels asked incredulously. "She made 4 trips under conditions that should have made flight impossible," Hayes explained. "No other pilot would attempt it. Most said it was certain death." The room fell silent as they watched the classified footage of those extraction flights, aircraft performing maneuvers that seemed to defy physics and pilot limitations. As the implications of what they were witnessing began to sink in, one question remained unspoken. If Blue Heron was this legendary, why had she been erased from all records? And more importantly, what had brought her back after 3 years of silence? The answer to those questions was approaching Pearl Harbor Naval Base at 110 knots, carrying secrets that would soon reshape everything they thought they knew about naval intelligence. Sophia's voice came through the communication system, clear and professional despite the extraordinary circumstances. "Command, we're on final approach to Delta 3. The unidentified helicopter is maintaining perfect formation, despite deteriorating conditions. Request ground security confirmation." "Security teams are in position, Lieutenant," Hayes responded, coordinating the landing with the efficiency of someone who had managed similar operations in the past. "Proceed with landing protocol." As the aircraft descended toward Pearl Harbor, Commander Chen continued revealing the classified history that had been buried for 3 years. The file showed a pattern that emerged following Operation Stormwatch Maya, uncovering inconsistencies in mission parameters, requesting formal investigations into intelligence failures. "She began asking questions about Operation Stormwatch," Chen explained, manipulating the display to show communication records and incident reports. "The intelligence that led to the research vessel being in that location had significant irregularities. She believed it was deliberate misinformation, that someone had intentionally endangered those scientists, and then she disappeared. Official records state she was lost in a training accident," Admiral Harrington said from the main screen, his expression grim with the weight of old decisions. "But her body was never recovered," Hayes corrected quietly. "In reality, she went underground after receiving credible threats against her life." Captain Daniels' expression had gradually shifted from indignation to shocked understanding as the scope of the situation became clear. "You're saying a black operations pilot who's been presumed dead for 3 years just flew directly into our most secure airspace during a typhoon warning?" Daniels asked, struggling to process the implications. "The question," came a new voice from the entrance, "is why she didn't simply make contact through official channels." Everyone turned to see Vice Admiral Eleanor Reeves striding into the command center flanked by security personnel. Tall and imposing at 60, Reeves had the bearing of someone accustomed to crisis management at the highest levels of naval command. "Madam Vice Admiral," Harrington acknowledged from the screen, "I wasn't aware you were en route. "I wasn't until 30 minutes ago," Reeves replied, her expression serious. When Blue Heron's signature appeared in the system, it triggered a silent alert. Only 5 people in the Navy were notified. Her gaze swept the room, taking in the assembled personnel with the calculating look of someone assessing security risks. If she's surfacing now after 3 years of silence, something catastrophic is coming. On the main screen, the radar showed all 3 helicopters touching down on the isolated landing pad designated Delta 3. Security teams moved into position, creating a perimeter around the area with military precision. "Patch me through to the landing pad," Reeves ordered. A new video feed appeared showing the unidentified Seahawk taxiing to a stop. Sophia's helicopter positioned itself nearby, rotors still turning as a precautionary measure. A small security detail had formed as word spread through the base that someone significant had arrived. The helicopter's door opened, and Maya Reed emerged carrying a weathered canvas backpack. She paused at the side of the aircraft, surveying the assembled personnel with a measured gaze that seemed to catalog every detail. Though dressed in civilian clothes, practical cargo pants, and a dark blue weatherproof jacket, her posture and bearing were unmistakably military. Lieutenant Sophia Keller had climbed down from her Seahawk and now stood at attention, saluting as Maya approached. Other personnel followed suit, though none of them could have known exactly who they were honoring. There was something in the moment that demanded respect, a recognition that they were witnessing the return of someone extraordinary. Maya acknowledged the salutes with a subtle nod, her expression remaining composed despite the emotional weight of returning to a world she had been forced to abandon. She walked directly toward the camera that was transmitting to the command center. "Heron secure," she said simply, her voice carrying the slight rasp of someone who had gone too long without using it for official communications. Vice Admiral Reeves leaned toward the microphone. "Confirm secure, Heron. Stand by for escort to Briefing Room Alpha." Turning to the others in the command center, Reeves' expression was solemn. 3 years ago, I was the intelligence director who received her concerns about Operation Stormwatch. I didn't act quickly enough on her information. By the time I realized she was right, she had already gone underground. "What was she right about?" Daniels asked, his earlier frustration replaced by genuine concern. "That there was a network of operatives within our intelligence apparatus working against American interests," Reeves answered. She had uncovered evidence during Stormwatch that certain crisis situations were being engineered to force specific military responses, creating geopolitical pressure points that could be exploited by hostile forces. "And now she's back," Hayes said, understanding the implications immediately. "Which means something similar is happening again." The video feed from the landing pad showed Maya being escorted to a secure vehicle by a detail of the highest-level security personnel available on base. Lieutenant Keller watched from a distance, her expression a mixture of awe and confusion as she tried to process what she had witnessed. "Bring Lieutenant Keller to the briefing as well," Reeves instructed. "If Maya chose her as escort, there's a reason." As the secure vehicle disappeared toward the classified briefing facilities, the assembled officers began to understand that they were witnessing something far more significant than a simple airspace violation. Blue Heron had returned from exile, and with her came secrets that could reshape their understanding of threats to naval security. The Pacific Ocean that had hidden her for 3 years now churned with the approaching typhoon, as if nature itself was responding to her return. Whatever had driven her to risk exposure after so many years of careful concealment was about to change everything. 20 minutes later, they had assembled in Briefing Room Alpha, the most secure facility on the base. The room's walls incorporated advanced electromagnetic shielding designed to prevent any form of electronic surveillance. Maya sat calmly at the center of the conference table, her weathered canvas backpack placed before her. She looked remarkably composed for someone who had just ended 3 years of self-imposed exile, her auburn hair now freed from its practical bun and falling just below her shoulders. Her civilian clothes seemed out of place amid the naval uniforms, but her bearing left no doubt about her background and capabilities. Vice Admiral Reeves entered last, sealing the door behind her with biometric locks that would prevent unauthorized access. The room fell silent as she approached Maya, and to everyone's surprise briefly embraced her. "You were right," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of old regrets. I should have listened years ago. Maya's expression softened momentarily, revealing a glimpse of the person beneath the professional facade. We don't have time for regrets, Eleanor. It's happening again. She opened her backpack with practiced efficiency and removed a small data drive which she inserted into the room's secure computer system. The screens around the room illuminated with complex patterns of data, communications intercepts, meteorological reports, naval deployment schedules, and personnel transfers. 5 days ago, a specific pattern of weather monitoring equipment failures began across the Pacific Fleet, Maya explained, her voice steady and clinical. It's the same signature I identified before Operation Stormwatch. The same people who buried that investigation are active again, operating under different names and positions. Captain Daniels leaned forward, still struggling to accept the situation, but beginning to understand its gravity. How could you possibly know this from outside the system? Because I never left the system, Maya replied, meeting his gaze directly. I just moved to its shadows. For 3 years, I've been monitoring from the outside, tracking patterns that can only be seen when you're not blinded by internal compartmentalization. She manipulated the data display, showing connections between seemingly unrelated events across naval installations throughout the Pacific. The pattern that emerged was subtle but unmistakable, a coordinated effort spanning multiple departments and classification levels. They've been planning this for years, she continued. The goal is the same as before, engineered crisis points that force specific military responses, creating opportunities for exploitation. What's the target? Reeves asked, though her expression suggested she already suspected the answer would be significant. The 7th Fleet, Maya said, bringing up a map of naval deployments across the Pacific. They've positioned assets to create the appearance of a brewing conflict in the South China Sea. When the 7th Fleet responds, they'll be sailing directly into the path of an artificially masked super typhoon. Admiral Hayes understood immediately, creating a rescue scenario rather than just a natural disaster. Not just a rescue scenario, Maya corrected, a perfect storm. The meteorological data being fed to the fleet has been compromised. They're sailing into a Category 5 typhoon, thinking it's only a tropical depression. The communication systems will fail precisely when accurate weather data would normally arrive. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. The 7th Fleet represented one of America's most significant power projection capabilities in the Pacific. Catastrophic damage to those vessels would reshape the balance of power throughout the region. How long do we have? Admiral Harrington asked from the video feed that had been maintained throughout the briefing. Maya checked her watch with the precision of someone who had been tracking a countdown for days. The 7th Fleet will reach the point of no return in 48 hours. After that, even at maximum speed, they won't be able to alter course enough to avoid the worst of the storm. Lieutenant Sophia Keller, who had remained silent throughout the briefing, finally spoke. Why come forward now? Why not work through official channels if you had this intelligence? Maya turned to her, studying the young pilot with apparent approval. Because the network includes people in official channels, my return was a test to see who would recognize the patterns and who would simply follow orders without question. The intercept was deliberate, Sophia realized. I needed to know who could be trusted when the moment came, Maya confirmed. Your flying during the intercept was impressive. Few current pilots would have maintained such precise formation in those wind conditions. Vice Admiral Reeves stood, moving to the secure communication station. I'll need to brief the CNO immediately. This takes priority over everything else. There's more, Maya said, her voice carrying a weight that made everyone in the room focus their attention on her. She removed another device from her backpack, a small tablet with encrypted storage. The network responsible for this operation has been embedding assets for nearly a decade. Every compromised meteorologist leads to a data analyst, every analyst to a communications officer, every communications officer to someone higher in the organization. She activated the tablet, displaying a complex organizational chart that showed connections reaching into the highest levels of naval command. This isn't just about stopping a single catastrophe. It's about exposing a network that has been operating within our system since before Operation Stormwatch. Many of them occupy positions of significant authority. The chart showed names and positions that made several people in the room visibly uncomfortable. The scope of potential compromise was staggering, reaching into agencies that were supposed to be beyond infiltration. "Trust only the personnel on your immediate team," Maya said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had survived 3 years by following that exact principle. "Until we can verify the full extent of the network, assume that normal communication channels have been compromised." Reeves studied the organizational chart with growing alarm. Some of these positions, if they're compromised, it means our response to any crisis could be anticipated and countered. "Which is exactly what happened during Operation Stormwatch," Maya replied. "And it's what they're counting on happening again." She closed the tablet and returned it to her backpack, then stood with the decisive movement of someone transitioning from briefing to action. "I'll need a small team, maximum security clearance, and full operational autonomy." "You'll have whatever you need," Reeves promised without hesitation. "This operation takes priority over everything else." As the briefing continued, Maya outlined her strategy for countering the impending disaster. Her plan was precise and methodical, revealing a mind that had spent 3 years preparing for this exact moment. She had identified the key vulnerabilities in the weather monitoring and communication systems, and developed countermeasures that could prevent the 7th Fleet from sailing into catastrophe. More importantly, she had devised a way to turn the enemy's operation against them, using their own planned disruptions as evidence to expose the compromised personnel and trace their connections back through the network. Lieutenant Sophia, watching this legendary figure calmly plotting to save thousands of lives, felt a mixture of admiration and profound respect. "Why?" she asked during a brief pause in the planning. "After everything that happened, after being forced into exile, why come back to help?" Maya paused in her preparations, her expression becoming thoughtful. For a moment, the professional mask slipped, revealing something more personal beneath. "Because some missions never end, Lieutenant," she said quietly. "I made a promise to the people we lost in Operation Stormwatch. This is part of keeping it." Outside the briefing room windows, palm trees bent under the strengthening winds of the approaching typhoon. Somewhere across the vast Pacific, the 7th Fleet was sailing toward what they believed was a routine deployment, unaware of the catastrophic storm being deliberately hidden from them. But the conspirators had made one critical miscalculation. They had assumed Blue Heron was truly dead. As the team prepared to deploy, Maya removed one final item from her backpack. It was a small fabric patch bearing a stylized blue heron in flight against a stormy background. Her original squadron patch from before the call sign became classified. "This belonged to my first squadron," she said, offering it to Sophia, "before everything became classified and compartmentalized." Sophia accepted it with surprised reverence. "I've studied what little was declassified about your rescue techniques. They're teaching modified versions in advanced training now." "The techniques don't matter," Maya replied, glancing toward the window where the palm trees whipped violently in the strengthening wind. "The mission does." As they prepared to leave the briefing room, the weight of what lay ahead settled over the small team. They had less than 48 hours to prevent a catastrophe that would cost thousands of lives, expose a network that had operated in the shadows for years, and do it all while assuming that their normal support systems might be compromised. But for the first time in 3 years, Blue Heron was no longer operating alone. And that might make all the difference between success and catastrophic failure. The skies above Pearl Harbor had darkened to an ominous charcoal gray as the outer bands of the typhoon reached the islands. Rain lashed across the tarmac in horizontal sheets, driven by winds that had already exceeded 60 knots. Most aircraft had been secured in hangars or evacuated to bases further east. Only one helicopter remained outside, its rotors already turning despite conditions that would normally ground all flights. Maya Reed stood on the edge of the helipad, the wind whipping her flight suit against her body as she studied the weather patterns, with the practiced eye of someone who had made a career of flying into storms that others fled. Behind her, a small team of specialists, handpicked from trusted personnel, prepared to board the modified SH-60 Seahawk. Admiral Hayes approached, hunched against the driving rain. "The secure communications array has been installed as you requested. Direct link to NAV-METOC satellites, bypassing standard relay stations." Maya nodded, her expression focused. And the specialized meteorological equipment? Loaded and calibrated. The most advanced weather monitoring systems we could find on short notice. It'll have to do, Maya replied, pulling on her flight helmet. We need definitive proof of the data manipulation to convince the fleet commander to alter course. As the small team completed final preparations, Lieutenant Sophia Keller conducted pre-flight checks with methodical precision. Her hands moved across the controls with the focus of someone who understood exactly what was at stake. When Maya climbed into the pilot's seat beside her, Sophia couldn't hide her surprise. "You're not taking command?" "We'll co-pilot," Maya explained, settling into the familiar confines of the cockpit. "I'll handle the specialized storm penetration maneuvers when we reach the Typhoon core, but I need you at the controls for the initial phase. Your familiarity with current naval protocols will be essential." As they lifted into the turbulent sky, the helicopter immediately began to buck against the strengthening crosswinds. Sophia compensated with practiced skill, but even she was impressed by the subtle adjustments Maya made to their collective controls. Minute changes that somehow brought a new stability to their flight. "How are you doing that?" Sophia asked, feeling the difference in the aircraft's handling. "Micro-adjustments based on reading the wind patterns," Maya replied, her voice calm, despite the violent conditions surrounding them. "You can feel the storm's rhythm if you pay attention. It's not random, even when it seems chaotic." Back at Pearl Harbor, Admiral Hayes and Vice Admiral Reeves had established a secure command center isolated from normal naval communications channels. Commander Chen coordinated intelligence, while Captain Daniels managed security, his initial skepticism now replaced by grim determination. "Seahawk is airborne," the communications officer reported. "Tracking systems active but operating on secured frequencies only." "What's their flight plan?" Daniels asked, studying the weather radar with growing concern. "They're heading directly toward the 7th Fleet's position," Hayes explained. "But they'll have to skirt the edge of the Typhoon to reach them. Even with Maya's skills, it's an extremely high-risk operation." "If anyone can navigate through this storm, it's Blue Heron," Reeves said, her expression resolute. "And we need that proof to convince the fleet commander to alter course." On the main display, satellite imagery showed the true extent of the typhoon forming in the Philippine Sea, a massive system with winds exceeding 175 knots near its core. But the official weather reports being transmitted to the 7th Fleet showed only a minor tropical depression in that location. "How is this level of data manipulation even possible?" Daniels asked, comparing the two vastly different weather models. "They've compromised key positions in the meteorological command chain," Chen explained, displaying the network chart Maya had provided. "Selective data filtering, artificially degraded satellite imagery, and falsified buoy readings. Individually, each discrepancy might be dismissed as equipment malfunction, but together, they create a death trap," Hayes finished grimly. "One that looks completely natural when the fleet sails into it." High above the Pacific, Maya and Sophia's helicopter fought against strengthening winds as they approached the outer bands of the typhoon. The specialized equipment in the cabin behind them gathered data that clearly demonstrated the massive disparity between the actual weather conditions and the falsified reports being transmitted to the fleet. "We've got it," reported Lieutenant Commander Nakamura, the meteorological specialist Maya had personally requested. "Definitive proof of data manipulation. The typhoon is at least 3 times more powerful than what's being reported to the fleet, and it's on a direct interception course with their planned route." "Transmitting data package to Pearl Harbor now," added Lieutenant Park, the communications specialist. "Using the secure channel only." Maya nodded, her focus remaining on the increasingly violent air currents buffeting their aircraft. "Lieutenant Keller, prepare to transfer flight control. We're about to enter the actual storm boundary," Sophia acknowledged, feeling a mixture of professional respect and personal awe as she watched Maya's demeanor change subtly. Where moments before had been a competent co-pilot, now sat a legend preparing to demonstrate exactly why that status had been earned. "I've never seen anyone fly deliberately into a typhoon before," Sophia admitted, her voice steady despite the tension in her hands. "Most pilots are trained to avoid storms," Maya replied, her fingers making minuscule adjustments to the controls as she took command of the aircraft. "I was trained to use them." As the helicopter entered the outer bands of the typhoon, the turbulence increased dramatically. The aircraft bucked and rolled as conflicting air currents slammed into it from multiple directions. Most pilots would have immediately turned back, but Maya leaned into the challenge, her hands moving across the controls with the fluid grace of an artist. "The key is to read the patterns within the chaos," she explained, her voice calm despite the violence surrounding them. "Feel how the primary airflow establishes a baseline rhythm, then identify the countercurrents and use them to stabilize your position." Sophia watched in amazement as Maya demonstrated exactly what she meant, using techniques that defied conventional flight training to maintain control in conditions that should have made flight impossible. The helicopter seemed to dance between violent air pockets, finding paths of relative stability that no instrument could have detected. Back at Pearl Harbor, the Secure Command Center received the data package from Maya's team. The evidence was irrefutable. Someone had deliberately manipulated weather data to send the 7th Fleet directly into the path of a super typhoon, while making them believe they were facing only minor storms. "Transmit this to the fleet commander immediately," Reeves ordered. "Priority Alpha, direct channel." "Transmission sent," the communications officer confirmed. "But we're getting no acknowledgement." Hayes frowned. "Try again on all secure frequencies." After several tense minutes, the officer shook his head. "No response, Admiral. It appears their communications may already be compromised. Or they're being jammed," Chen suggested. "Part of the operation to isolate them as they sail into the trap." Reeves' expression hardened. "If we can't warn them remotely, we'll have to do it directly." "Can Blue Heron reach the fleet before they enter the critical zone?" "Not at their current position and speed," Hayes said, studying the navigational data. "The fleet will reach the point of no return before Maya's team can intercept them." In the storm-tossed helicopter, Maya received this update with grim determination. "We need to increase our speed," she said, already adjusting their course to penetrate deeper into the typhoon. "That's impossible," Nakamura protested. "We're already at maximum safe airspeed for these conditions. Any faster and the structural integrity of the aircraft will be compromised." "Safe parameters were established by pilots who avoid storms," Maya replied, her focus absolute as she guided the helicopter into what appeared to be the most violent section of the weather system. "We're going to use the storm itself to accelerate our approach." Sophia looked at her in disbelief. "How?" "The same way hurricanes intensify over warm water," Maya explained. "We're going to ride the energy gradient between pressure systems." What followed was a masterclass in advanced aviation that few living pilots could have executed. Maya guided their helicopter along the boundaries between storm cells, using the massive energy differentials to propel them forward at speeds that should have torn the aircraft apart. Instead, through micro-adjustments that seemed almost prescient, she maintained control while dramatically increasing their velocity. "This is impossible," Sophia whispered, watching Maya's hands move across the controls with hypnotic precision. "Not impossible," Maya corrected, her voice calm despite the extraordinary maneuvers she was executing. "Just improbable. The difference matters." In Pearl Harbor, the tracking systems showed the helicopter's sudden acceleration with disbelief. "They've nearly doubled their effective speed," the radar operator reported, stunned. "How is that even possible in those conditions?" "That's why she's Blue Heron," Hayes said simply, a note of pride in her voice. "She doesn't just fly through storms, she harnesses them." As Maya's helicopter raced toward the 7th Fleet's position, the team continued gathering and transmitting evidence of the weather manipulation. The pattern was now unmistakable, a deliberate operation designed to place American naval forces in catastrophic danger while making it appear to be a natural disaster. "We've identified the source of the falsified data," Park announced, his analysis complete. "It's being inserted at 3 key relay points in the meteorological reporting chain. All 3 points were recently serviced by contractors from the same company." "Cross-reference with Maya's network chart," Chen instructed back at Pearl Harbor. The results confirmed their worst fears. The contractors were directly connected to the same shadow operation Maya had uncovered 3 years earlier. "We've got them," Reeves said grimly. "Now we just need to save the fleet." Through storm-tossed skies that would have grounded any other aircraft, Maya pushed the helicopter to its absolute limits. Every mile brought them closer to the 7th Fleet, racing against time to intercept the ships before they crossed the point of no return. "Fleet position confirmed," Park reported, as their specialized radar finally penetrated the electromagnetic interference surrounding the naval task force. They're maintaining course and speed directly toward the typhoon core. "Any response to our transmissions?" Maya asked, guiding the helicopter through a particularly violent section of the storm. "Negative. All standard channels appear to be compromised or jammed." Maya's expression hardened with determination. "Then we'll have to deliver the warning in person. Lieutenant Keller, prepare for direct approach to the flagship." Sophia nodded, her training kicking in despite the extraordinary circumstances. Emergency landing protocols on carrier deck in typhoon conditions. Not exactly covered in the flight manual. "We'll write a new chapter," Maya replied, the ghost of a smile crossing her features. "Sometimes the only way forward is to rewrite the rules." As they approached the massive aircraft carrier that served as the fleet's flagship, the full extent of the conspiracy became clear. The ship was already experiencing conditions far beyond what their instruments were reporting. Massive waves and winds that threatened to overwhelm even the mighty vessel's systems. They have no idea what they're sailing into, Sophia realized, watching the carrier pitch violently in seas that should have triggered immediate course corrections. "Then we'll show them," Maya replied, guiding their helicopter toward the heaving flight deck in a maneuver that defied conventional aviation wisdom. In that moment, as Blue Heron returned from the shadows to save those who never knew they were in danger, a legend was reborn, not through classified reports or whispered stories, but through actions that would soon become the stuff of naval aviation history. The storm raged around them, its fury undiminished, but in the skilled hands of Commander Maya Reed, even nature's wrath became a tool rather than an obstacle. And for the young pilots who would hear this story in years to come, one lesson would stand above all others. Some missions never end, and true courage lies in returning to face the storm when everyone else has fled. The aircraft carrier, USS Nimitz, pitched violently as another massive wave crashed against its hull. On the bridge, Admiral Marcus Fletcher gripped the edge of the tactical display as the ship rolled beneath him. Something wasn't right. The weather reports indicated moderate seas with occasional squalls. Nothing that should challenge a vessel of this size. "Latest meteorological updates, sir," the weather officer reported, consulting his data terminal with growing concern. Still showing tropical depression conditions, but these readings, he hesitated, looking out the windows at the churning seas beyond. "They don't match what we're experiencing." Admiral Fletcher had commanded the 7th Fleet for 2 years, and in 27 years of naval service he had developed instincts that transcended data points on screens. Those instincts were now screaming a warning. "Communication status?" he demanded, turning to his operations officer. "Still experiencing intermittent failures across standard channels, sir. Satellite uplinks are degrading, and we've lost contact with our forward elements." Fletcher's eyes narrowed. "That's the 3rd communications anomaly in 6 hours, combined with these weather discrepancies." An urgent call from the Flight Control Center interrupted his analysis. "Bridge, this is Flight Ops. We have an inbound helicopter requesting emergency landing clearance. They're broadcasting on an old emergency frequency with a classified recognition code." "What recognition code?" Fletcher asked sharply. "Blue Heron, sir." A moment of absolute silence fell across the bridge as officers exchanged glances of disbelief. Blue Heron was a name few had heard outside classified briefings, and fewer still believed was anything more than a naval legend. "Clear them for immediate landing," Fletcher ordered, his decision instant and absolute. "I want security protocols Alpha 7 for their arrival." "Sir, in these conditions, landing operations are suspended," the flight operations officer protested. "The deck is pitching too severely for safe recovery." "They wouldn't be approaching if they couldn't land," Fletcher responded with certainty. "Clear the deck and prepare for recovery." High above the carrier, Maya studied the heaving flight deck with analytical precision. The massive ship was pitching and rolling far more violently than the crew would have anticipated based on their falsified weather data. Landing a helicopter on a carrier deck was challenging under ideal conditions. Attempting it in a developing super typhoon bordered on impossible for anyone else. "Approach vector calculated," Maya announced, her voice calm despite the extraordinary difficulty of what they were about to attempt. "Sophia, I'll need you on the collective. We'll time our descent with the ship's motion." Sophia nodded, her hands steady on the controls despite her racing heart. "Ready when you are." Maya guided the helicopter into position, hovering above the carrier as it rose and fell on massive swells. Unlike standard approach procedures that relied on constant descent, Maya held them in a precise position, watching the rhythm of the ship's movement. "The key is to anticipate the pattern," she explained, eyes never leaving the deck below. "Every ship has a unique motion signature in heavy seas. Find the pattern, and you can predict where the deck will be." Sophia watched in amazement as Maya demonstrated exactly what she meant, timing their descent to match a complex movement pattern that seemed chaotic to the untrained eye. Where most pilots would have seen only random motion, Maya perceived an underlying rhythm. "Now," Maya commanded, initiating their final approach precisely as the carrier crested a massive wave. The helicopter dropped toward the deck with terrifying speed, matching the ship's downward motion before flaring at exactly the right moment. Their skids touched down with a precision that defied the violent conditions, and deck crews rushed forward to secure the aircraft even as the next wave sent spray cascading across the flight deck. Admiral Fletcher was waiting as Maya and her team disembarked, his expression a mixture of disbelief and grim determination. Security personnel formed a protective cordon around them as they hurried inside, away from the punishing wind and rain. "Commander Reed," Fletcher acknowledged once they reached the secure briefing room adjacent to the bridge. "Your reputation precedes you, though I was informed you were deceased." "Reports of my death were bureaucratically convenient, Admiral," Maya replied, wasting no time on pleasantries. "Your fleet is sailing into a trap. The weather data you're receiving has been deliberately falsified. You're not heading into a tropical depression. You're on a collision course with a Category 5 super typhoon." Without waiting for a response, she connected her data drive to the ship's secure systems. Displays around the room illuminated with the true meteorological data her team had gathered during their storm penetration flight. "This is the actual weather system directly in your path," she explained, highlighting the massive storm formation. "Wind speeds exceeding 175 knots near the core, wave heights potentially reaching 70 feet or more. Your fleet has approximately 3 hours before entering conditions that will make course correction impossible." Fletcher studied the data with the focused intensity of someone whose entire command had just been placed in jeopardy. "How is this possible? Our meteorological systems are redundant and secured. They've been compromised," Sophia explained, stepping forward with the network analysis. "We've identified infiltration at multiple levels within the weather monitoring chain. The falsified data is being inserted through seemingly legitimate channels." Fletcher's expression darkened. "Who would do this? And why?" "The same network that orchestrated the Mariana Islands incident 3 years ago," Maya replied. "Their goal is to create what appears to be a natural disaster that devastates American naval power in the Pacific. The resulting chaos would create strategic opportunities for multiple hostile actors." As the implications sank in, Fletcher turned to his communications officer. "Broadcast fleet-wide course correction immediately. All vessels to alter heading to 120 degrees. "Sir," the officer hesitated, "standard communications are still experiencing significant disruption." "Then use every alternative we have," Fletcher ordered. "Emergency frequencies, visual signaling, anything to get the message through." Maya shook her head. "They've anticipated that. Your standard alternate channels have likely been compromised as well." "What do you suggest, Commander?" Fletcher asked, recognizing the expertise of the woman who had flown through a typhoon to deliver this warning. "We need to bypass the compromised systems entirely," Maya replied, removing additional equipment from her team's gear. "We brought specialized communications hardware that operates on frequencies they won't be monitoring. If we can link it to your emergency broadcast system, we can reach the entire fleet simultaneously." As Maya's team worked to establish the secure communication link, Fletcher assembled his senior officers for an emergency briefing. The evidence was irrefutable. Someone had deliberately placed the 7th Fleet in mortal danger, while making it appear to be nothing more than unfortunate weather circumstances. "This is beyond sabotage," Fletcher's executive officer said, reviewing the network analysis. "This is an act of war." "First, we save the fleet," Fletcher replied. "Then we deal with those responsible." On the bridge, officers worked frantically to calculate new navigation routes that would take their vessels away from the approaching storm's path. The window for escape was narrowing with each passing minute as the typhoon intensified and accelerated toward their position. "Secure communication link established," Maya announced, returning to the bridge with Sophia and her team. "We can broadcast to all vessels simultaneously, but we'll need to provide them with the authentication codes to verify the orders are legitimate." Fletcher nodded grimly. "I'll deliver the message personally." Throughout the massive carrier battle group, confusion reigned as communications officers suddenly received transmissions on emergency channels that hadn't been used in years. On every vessel, commanders were presented with orders to execute an immediate course change based on meteorological data that contradicted everything their instruments were showing. The authentication codes accompanying the transmission, however, came directly from Admiral Fletcher himself, using security protocols that couldn't be faked. One by one, the massive warships began their turns, altering course away from what they now knew was a deadly trap. The maneuvers weren't without risk. Executing such significant course changes in already deteriorating sea conditions placed enormous stress on both vessels and crews. But the alternative was certain catastrophe. On the Nimitz, Maya stood at the tactical display, watching as the fleet executed its emergency maneuvers. Her expression remained focused, revealing nothing of the emotions that must have accompanied this moment of vindication after 3 years in exile. Even with the course correction, we'll still experience significant storm conditions, the meteorological officer warned, studying the updated projections based on Maya's accurate data. The outer bands will reach us within the hour. Prepare all vessels for heavy weather operations, Fletcher ordered. And I want damage control teams on standby throughout the fleet. As the massive naval formation executed its turn away from disaster, Maya stepped aside with Sophia, their work on the bridge temporarily complete. "You saved thousands of lives today," Sophia said quietly. "They would have sailed directly into that typhoon completely unprepared." Maya's expression remained solemn. "The mission isn't complete. Saving the fleet was only half the objective. We still need to expose the network that orchestrated this." "How do we do that from the middle of the ocean during a typhoon?" Sophia asked. "By following the data trail while it's still fresh," Maya replied. "The people who infiltrated the meteorological systems had to leave digital fingerprints. Now that we know what to look for, we can trace them back to their sources." In the carrier's intelligence center, Maya worked with the ship's cybersecurity team to analyze the compromised weather data. The falsification patterns revealed sophisticated algorithms designed to gradually alter legitimate information in ways that would appear to be natural degradation of accuracy rather than deliberate manipulation. "These algorithms require significant computing power and specialized knowledge," noted Lieutenant Commander Raj Patel, who had joined Maya's team from Pearl Harbor. "They're not something a typical hacker could deploy." "Look for the authentication signatures," Maya instructed. "Every data packet has to carry legitimate credentials to pass through naval security systems." As they dug deeper into the corrupted data streams, a pattern began to emerge, one that pointed toward a specific source within the Naval Meteorological Command structure. "This can't be right," the ship's intelligence officer said, staring at the analysis results in disbelief. "These authentication codes originate from Naval Weather Service Command in Virginia." "Not just from the command," Maya said grimly, highlighting a specific signature pattern. "From the director's office itself." The implications were staggering. If the director of the Naval Weather Service was compromised, it meant the infiltration had reached far higher into naval command than anyone had suspected. Admiral Fletcher received this information with the controlled fury of a commander who had nearly lost his entire fleet to treachery. Quote, "I want irrefutable evidence," he ordered. "When we make these accusations, there can be no room for doubt." "We'll have it," Maya assured him. "The storm actually works to our advantage." They didn't expect any vessels to be analyzing their data manipulation during a catastrophic weather event. They expected no survivors to question the weather reports. As the outer bands of the typhoon reached the fleet, the massive ships began to pitch and roll with increasing violence. Wave heights exceeded 40 feet, crashing over bows and sweeping across decks with frightening force. But the experienced crews had prepared properly, securing everything that could move and battening down for heavy weather operations. Had they still been on their original course, heading directly into the storm's core, not even the most skilled seamanship could have saved them from disaster. Now, skirting the typhoon's edge, they faced dangerous but survivable conditions. In the intelligence center, Maya and her team continued their relentless analysis, tracing data pathways through the complex network of naval weather systems. Each connection they uncovered revealed another compromised node, another security breach that had been expertly concealed within legitimate operations. It's not just meteorological systems, Sophia realized, connecting patterns across different data streams. They've infiltrated communications, navigation, even tactical information networks. This is a preparation for something much bigger than just destroying the Seventh Fleet, Maya concluded. They're positioning assets throughout naval command structures. For what purpose? Fletcher asked, having returned to review their findings. To ensure American naval power is compromised at a critical moment, Maya explained. Create enough simultaneous failures across different systems, and you can effectively neutralize the entire Pacific Fleet without firing a single shot. The revelation sent a chill through the command staff. This wasn't merely sabotage. It was strategic paralysis of American military capability, orchestrated from within. As the storm raged around them, Maya's team assembled comprehensive evidence documenting the network of compromised systems and personnel. The digital trail was complex, but unmistakable once you knew what to look for. Subtle patterns of data manipulation that had escaped, noticed precisely because they were designed to appear as normal system variations. "We need to get this information to naval intelligence immediately," Fletcher declared, reviewing the evidence. "But our long-range communications are still compromised." "We have the secure transmission equipment we brought from Pearl Harbor," Maya reminded him, "but we'll need to boost its power to penetrate these storm conditions." The ship's communications officers worked with Maya's team to modify their specialized equipment, combining it with the carrier's powerful transmission systems while keeping it isolated from potentially compromised networks. The resulting hybrid system was unconventional but effective, capable of sending encrypted data packages that would bypass the normal communication channels the conspirators were monitoring. "Transmission ready," Sophia reported after hours of meticulous work. "Package includes complete evidence files and identification of all compromised systems we've discovered so far." Maya nodded, her expression resolute. "Send it directly to Admiral Hayes at Pearl Harbor. She'll ensure it reaches the right people." As the secure transmission launched, carrying evidence that would expose a conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of naval command, Maya stepped onto the carrier's observation deck. Despite the violent weather conditions, she needed a moment away from screens and data, a moment to feel the storm that had nearly claimed thousands of lives. The wind howled around her, driving rain horizontally across the deck with punishing force. Most people would have seen only chaos and danger in the typhoon's fury. Maya saw patterns and rhythms, the complex interplay of forces that made the storm both predictable and navigable if you understood its fundamental nature. Sophia joined her, bracing against the wind. "Transmission confirmed received at Pearl Harbor. Admiral Hayes is initiating immediate security protocols." Maya nodded, her gaze still fixed on the storm. "It begins." "What happens now?" Sophia asked, raising her voice above the wind's howl. "Now the harder part starts," Maya replied. "Exposing conspirators is relatively straightforward when you have evidence. Rebuilding trust in institutions they've compromised is far more difficult." The ship rolled beneath them as another massive wave struck its hull, a physical reminder of the dangers they had narrowly avoided. Yet in that moment of violent motion, both women maintained perfect balance, an instinctive adjustment that spoke to their training as pilots. "You could have sent the warning anonymously," Sophia noted. "Stayed hidden. Why risk exposure after 3 years of successful concealment?" Maya was silent for a long moment, watching the storm's fury unleash itself against the carrier's armored hull. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a depth of conviction that transcended the howling wind. "Because some missions require more than information. They require presence, being willing to stand physically in the storm you're warning others about." She turned to face the younger pilot, rain streaming down her face. "Anyone can send a warning from safety. Leading means being willing to fly into the heart of the danger you're asking others to confront." In that moment, as the typhoon raged around them and a different kind of storm gathered in the corridors of naval power, Sophia understood why Blue Heron had become legendary. It wasn't just exceptional skill or courage that set Maya Reed apart. It was her fundamental understanding that leadership required visible commitment to the truth, regardless of personal cost. Back in the intelligence center, reports began arriving from other vessels in the fleet. Each ship was discovering evidence of compromised systems now that they knew what to look for. The conspiracy had infiltrated everything from navigation systems to weapons targeting computers. A comprehensive preparation for catastrophic failure at a critical moment. They'd been building this network for years, Admiral Fletcher realized, reviewing the compilation of reports, using legitimate contractors, software updates, routine maintenance, all to insert their people and modifications. The perfect infiltration, Maya agreed. Invisible until activated, and when discovered, apparently traceable only to equipment failures or natural disasters. As the fleet continued its struggle against the Typhoon's outer bands, Maya worked with Fletcher's staff to develop a comprehensive security response. Every compromised system had to be identified, isolated, and restored using clean backups. Every suspicious personnel transfer had to be reviewed. Every data pathway had to be verified. It will take months to completely secure all systems, the fleet's chief technology officer warned. Some hardware will need to be physically replaced. Then we start now, Fletcher decided, beginning with critical combat and navigation systems. Throughout the night, as the storm gradually receded behind them, teams worked tirelessly to implement security protocols developed on the fly. Maya moved between departments, providing insights that could only come from someone who had spent 3 years studying the conspiracy from outside the system. Her presence alone inspired extraordinary effort. The legend of Blue Heron had spread throughout the fleet. The pilot who had disappeared 3 years ago, presumed dead, only to return precisely when her skills were most desperately needed. The woman who had flown through a typhoon to deliver a warning that saved thousands of lives. A specialized task force, Maya replied without hesitation. Small, mobile, and operating under deep cover. We deploy to the South China Sea region with modified Tempest technology, identify their weather manipulation systems, and neutralize them before they can be activated at scale. And the personnel for this operation? The president asked. Maya's response was immediate. I'll lead the field team personally, with Lieutenant Keller as my second-in-command. We'll need the original Tempest scientists and a small support team with specialized training. The room fell silent as the assembled leaders considered the proposal. What Maya was suggesting went beyond conventional military operations into a realm of covert action with significant strategic implications. The risks are substantial, the Secretary of Defense noted. If you're captured or the operation is exposed, it could provide justification for exactly the kind of international incident they're trying to engineer. The risks of inaction are greater, Maya replied steadily. Every day we delay gives them more time to position their assets and refine their capabilities. The president studied her thoughtfully. 3 years ago you were forced into exile for trying to expose a conspiracy no one believed existed. Now you're volunteering to put yourself at even greater risk to stop that same conspiracy. Why? Maya met the president's gaze with the quiet confidence that had carried her through years of isolation and doubt. Because some missions define who we are, Mr. President. This one defines whether we stand by while others engineer conflicts that could cost millions of lives, or whether we act to prevent that suffering before it begins. After a moment of consideration, the president nodded. Operation Blue Wake is authorized to transition to active intervention. You'll have whatever resources you require, Commander Reed. But understand this. If you're compromised, official acknowledgement may be impossible. I understand, Mr. President, Maya replied. 3 years in exile taught me how to operate without official support. As the meeting concluded, Sophia joined Maya in the secure anteroom where they waited for their transport back to Coronado. The weight of what they had just committed to hung between them, a mission with global implications and extraordinary personal risk. You could have assigned the field operation to someone else, Sophia noted. Directed it remotely from secure headquarters. Maya shook her head. Leadership means being willing to take the same risks you ask of others. I won't send people into a storm I'm not willing to navigate myself. Sophia studied the woman who had become both mentor and legend in the space of a few short weeks. 3 years ago, they tried to destroy you. They took your career, your reputation, even your identity. Most people would have stayed hidden, protected themselves. Most people haven't flown through a Category 5 typhoon to save strangers, Maya replied with the ghost of a smile. Once you've done that, your perspective on acceptable risk changes permanently. As they prepared to depart for what might be their most challenging mission yet, Sophia realized the most powerful lesson Blue Heron had taught her had nothing to do with aviation or intelligence operations. It was about the courage to stand for truth when all systems were aligned against you, not as a grand gesture, but as a quiet, unshakable commitment that withstood even years of isolation. In the coming weeks, they would face dangers beyond anything in their training. They would operate without safety nets in hostile territory against an enemy with resources that spanned nations and industries. The odds were daunting by any conventional assessment. But conventional assessments didn't account for the determination of a pilot who had once flown into the heart of a typhoon because strangers needed saving. A woman who had spent 3 years in exile, not in hiding, but in preparation for the moment when truth would need a champion. As their transport lifted off from the Pentagon helipad, carrying them toward the next phase of a mission that had already spanned years, Maya gazed out at the Washington Monument, standing tall against the evening sky. A fitting symbol, Sophia thought, for someone whose own unwavering commitment to principle had weathered storms both literal and figurative. "They tried to erase you from history," Sophia said quietly. "Instead, they created a legend." Maya's expression remained composed, but something in her eyes acknowledged the truth of those words. "Legends are just stories people tell after the fact, Lieutenant. What matters is what we do right now, in the moments when no one may ever know what choices we made." As the helicopter banked toward the setting sun, carrying them toward a mission that might never appear in any official record, both women understood the fundamental truth that had brought Blue Heron back from exile. Some storms can only be navigated by those willing to fly directly into their heart, guided not by recognition or reward, but by the unwavering conviction that saving others is always worth the risk. The legend of Blue Heron was still being written, not in official commendations or historical records, but in the quiet courage of showing up when the storm is at its worst, when standing for truth means standing alone. Until it doesn't. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.